Falconry has been around for thousands of years and across the world. In Saudi Arabia and a lot of the Arabic countries, they used to race their birds. In England and, you know, all over Europe, they used to actually hunt with their birds. And so it's something that I've always been really, really interested in watching, some of those old English movies and stuff like that, hunting with these different raptor species. And I am extremely, extremely excited to talk to Travis Ulbrich, Yappy the Beeman, and now I'm calling him Yappy the Birdman because he's starting to become very knowledgeable on hunting with these predator species. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Yappy Ulbrich and we're going to get this thing kicked off. But first, I want to mention a couple companies that I work with and I really love. One of which is Switching Camo. I can't say enough about this company. We help current and former military get into the outdoors and really get the stresses off of their daily lives. They do so much for us, and they have done so much for us that we just really want to give back. So I encourage you to follow us with Switching Camo. Uh, Donate by buying a hat, buying a shirt, hoodie, whatever, to help us get a veteran in need out on a hunt, a hiking trip, fishing trip, whatever. Another company that I like to work with and I've been very faithful to, I absolutely love them, is Mystery Ranch. If you are looking for a great backpacking backpack, Mystery Ranch is the way to go. I've field tested my Mystery Ranch Metcalf with 100 pounds in the pack for a couple months straight, with about 4 miles every other day minimum, and sometimes a lot longer than that. And that thing held up to the test. It's just a phenomenal pack. I still use that pack now, and I've packed out several animals with it. So I highly recommend Mystery Ranch. Also, Cutco Cutlery. I was sent a knife from Cutco Cutlery. This is another company I'm very, very loyal to. We they sent me this knife, and I wanted to see how long this thing would stay sharp. It was the Double D clip point hunting knife, and I processed 25 animals this year with it. Not all, of course, mine, but buddies or other people that I went out hunting with, and it was still sharp until somebody actually just ran off with it. So it is a outstanding, outstanding knife. Highly recommend Cutco Cutlery. They have a great, great line of kitchen knives as well. I really recommend them. And the last company is Tioga Rise Coffee. In the in the backpacking world, um, we need to pick me up in the morning. I'm like addicted to coffee, and I don't like to sit there and wait for the drip coffees and stuff like that are out there. Not that they're bad, it's just it's not my style. So I love Tioga Rise. It's an instant coffee, but it does not taste like your traditional instant coffee. It is phenomenal. So highly recommend you look up Tioga Rise, get a box, and see what you think. It is amazing. But without further ado, on to the podcast. We got Yappy the Beeman. Well, formerly Yappy the Beeman, now it's Yappy the Birdman. He's starting to become quite the expert in falconry, even though I'm
You're what, an apprentice? Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. This is actually my second year into the fun and excitement, shall we say? And when you first get into it, you're at an apprentice level for your first 2 years, calendar years. So yes, I'm at the apprentice level, meaning that I have to be under a sponsor who is the next class, a general class or a master class, for my first 2 years.
Okay, so can you actually go over all of this? Like, um, well, let me back up. Might be absolutely rude. So, with Travis Ulbrich, um, he we had a podcast. What was it? About a month ago, and we ran pretty long with the podcast, and we went from talking about bees, which both of us are extremely passionate about, to and actually removing bees, and just a whole host of different things, um, to falconry, which was one of the big reasons that that I wanted to talk to you about, other than the fact that I kind of idolized you in the bee world, and I had no idea that you were into the falcons, um, into the raptor species and hunting with raptors, until um, my daughter's got a life lesson in predator management, um, with a hawk that came down and got our chickens, and right in front of them. So I had posted a picture. You got my daughter crying, and then a dead chicken, and then a picture of a hawk up in a tree. And you hit me up on Facebook, and were feeling me out, I guess, to see, I guess, what I was thinking.
Well, there was a lot of comments that people see this, and comments get made, and it don't matter, you know really honestly, in any board on Facebook. But there were comments that were getting put in there. People are like, oh, if it's killing your chickens, you can shoot it, and making just some kind of real bad advice out on there. And when I tend, because I'm into the sport, when I see stuff like that, I try to throw a little bit of PR out there and just explain to people that actually these are protected birds under the Migratory Act, and um, because they're protected, it's actually federally illegal to kill them. And
Right.
people get into the big arguments. Well, no, if they're killing my animals, I have the right to protect them. And
Absolutely not. Tell that to the farmers out here in Montana that if they have a grizzly that's um, all over their cows and stuff like that, there's nothing they can do about it. If
oh
they're
yeah,
protected, they're protected.
right. So I people have their the old time thought processes, and they're not really aware of the actual federal laws and things. So best thing you can do is just try to educate people and make them more aware of what the situation is, but then also offer up suggestions to help them understand on how to protect whatever it is of their animals per se, that how to help protect them, to keep that from happening again, and explain to them what was actually going on. In your situation, based on the picture that you shared with me, you had a juvenile red-tailed hawk that was in your area, and your chicken's free range. So juvenile birds actually are looking for the easy meal, and when you've got some free range chickens running around in the yard, to a raptor, that's actually a pretty easy, simple meal. And that's kind of what happened in your situation. So
Well, we do let our chickens free range, but actually, what had happened was we didn't have anything over top of the run, which we have a really large run, so they might as well have been free ranging.
right,
Um, but we didn't have anything to deter anything from coming over top of the fence,
yeah,
and it got smacked inside the fence. But Nevertheless, it was still wide open.
Nevertheless, your children learned a hard lesson in nature.
Oh yeah. Well, and, it's really a good lesson. In my mind. I mean, you apply it out here, and I've with what I had shared with you earlier today. Actually, we were talking on the phone a little bit ago, and so it just came out in the news that 19 elk were killed, 16 of which were calves, in one night by a pack of wolves. And normally that doesn't happen with wild game. Normally that happens with livestock. I've got some friends in Dillon that lost over 100 sheep in one night. And that was a few years back. I think it was like 8 or so years back, something like that. But nevertheless, you look at these predator species and stuff like that, which, these falcons are a predator species. They're preying on other animals. They eat carrion or dead animals, and they kill live animals. And it's important for the kids to know that life feeds on life, and that's just the way it works.
Well,
you still there?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm enjoying our podcasting. Well, nature can be such a cruel lesson all over.
Oh yeah.
Depending on you were talking about, like, the issues with wolves. That I don't know of a lot of predators that actually would just kill to be killing. In the hawk situation, I'll tell you what, another question we get a lot of in the falconry side is people asking, will a hawk come and kill my dog, or try to kill my dog or my cat or something like that? And it's such a rare situation for it to happen, but the answer is the potential's there. In circumstance with your chicken, or somebody else post about a chicken, you'd be amazed. Your juvenile birds usually, they come out of the nest and they kind of hang out in the tree and bounce around on the branches. In my area, my reference is in Alabama. I mean, I'm out of Alabama if you guys are coming into this part of the podcasting. And so, our birds are, they're coming out of the nest and bouncing around in the trees, generally around, April, the end of April. And generally by the end of May, 1st of June, that's when the phone calls start coming about, people wondering this, because the birds are flying. They're branching out. They're kind of learning to hunt, and they'll see one of those birds sitting in a tree in their back, near their backyard, or on a telephone pole or something like that. And it does raise concern. But my general answer to everybody is, it's your responsibility to protect your child. If your child were to run out in the middle of the road and get hit by a car, would you then run out there and shoot the guy who was driving the car, who didn't do anything wrong? He wasn't speeding. He was on the right side of the road. He was just headed home from work. But do you have the right to go out and shoot the guy who was driving the car because he hit your kid who was playing in the road when he wasn't supposed to be? It's our responsibilities to protect our personal pets, livestock, whatever you want to call it. There are predators that are out there, whether it be a red-tailed hawk, or whether it be a coyote, depending on where you're at. Whether it could be a bear for all intents and purposes. And it's if the scenarios at the end of it's the same. If you don't protect it, it has a chance to be injured or killed. So, I kind of take offense when people get all upset, and the first answer is to shoot it. If you have to resort to the point of dealing, your solution requires a gun, then you've already lost.
Ooh, be careful with that one.
Well,
Those gun advocates.
No,
Which,
listen, I'm not. I'm not saying it. Listen, I own two safe full of guns. Okay, I'm an avid hunter, um, both with a gun and a red tail hawk. Okay, I'm actually in the process of through some friends and some avenues. I'm actually getting into trapping, and it kind of
yeah.
supports. The reason I'm getting into trapping is because it will actually assist in supporting my overall goals in falconry and supplemental feeding of my birds, because long story short, I also want to assist in rehabilitation of birds. So that's another
Okay.
conversation. But at the end of the day, if your solution, and I say that with, I'll talk it out with anybody. If your solution at the end of the day is to fix your problem with a gun, then you've already lost your battle. You have plenty of time between now and that incident to make the preparations to protect what you have. Um, there's all kind of different scenarios. So, I'm blanketing this, but that's my opinion.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's not going to be you're going to have situations, right, where you're probably going to need the use of a gun. I don't. So I'm gonna say this because I think the way you said it, we're gonna get a lot of blowback if anybody's listening to this that is an anti-gun advocate. Um, we're talking about with a
Okay,
predator
my apologies. I
species.
see where you're going with it now, and I go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, we're talking about with a predator species. If you're protecting your life, I think it's a little bit different. Well, a lot different.
And I agree. I mean, there's a big difference between a bird taking a chicken and a bear coming in, or coyotes or wolves or something that are coming in, and they're encroaching into certain circumstances. Um,
Trying to get you,
yes,
you
you,
know.
a child. Yes. Now, in regards to that, yes, I do understand, and yes, I do agree. There are. I'm only referencing in this conversation in regards to falconry versus pets or livestock that you're accountable for as far as in your own yard.
Well, although I will say that um, I kind of think the same way with livestock, and here's why I think that. So we came in and we decimated all these species, and um, there's tons of documents to show that we killed off wolves in the livestock association and stuff like that. No offense to anybody who is a farmer or anything, or a rancher. I love ranchers. I've got a lot of really good friends that are ranchers. I grew up ranching. I get it. I understand that's your livelihood. But there's a lot of documentation to show that the livestock association was behind a lot of killing of these predator species because um, they were competing with us, growing livestock and stuff like that. Um, wolves is a great example of that. I'm not saying that I'm a huge wolf advocate and all that kind of stuff, because I'm kind of treading on thin ice with this, but um, I think that it was theirs first. And if we're going to bring a species back, like we seem to be doing with the grizzly and the wolf and stuff like that, we've got to be able to share that with them. And we've got to know that, they have a certain radius and stuff like that, and they're not going to be as well, they're not going to be understanding of fence lines. So they see a slow elk out in the middle of the yard, and all of you Western hunters will probably understand what I mean by slow elk. I mean a cow out in the middle of the yard or of the pasture, and that's easy pickings. You know, a predator does not know the difference between a cow and a sick animal that, you know, doesn't move very fast. They just see, hey, you know, I got this cow right there. They're not very fast. I'm going to take one down. That's it. I think if we're going to bring a species back, we need to be cognizant of that. And it is up to us to protect our own livestock. If that means putting bigger fences or, you know, higher fences or whatever, or hog wire instead of barbed wire or whatever, you know, that may be what it means. But I don't know. It's a hard thing to say because you've got also situations like with eagles and stuff like that, where they're coming in and taking people's sheep.
Yeah,
You know,
I'm aware of a story somewhere out west where there's a guy that's got it's a sheep or a lamb farm, and the bald eagles and possibly golden eagles have figured out that there's a food source there. I mean, when we take away the human element or the human feeling completely out of a conversation, and we understand nature in its truest form, you have predators and you have prey, and you know some prey are also predators, and you know everybody understands that, but there's always something out there that's going to eat something else. Well, we get into this weird balance in conservation, as well as, you know, the government stepping in and advocacy groups stepping in, and you know, trying to figure out this balance. Well, if you have a species that we're trying to repopulate and get off of a endangered list, at some point they get off that list, but then at a later point they're going to, this protected nobody can kill it species of anything is going to get to a point where they're so populated that they're going to start causing problems. And
you gotta manage them. And
yeah,
yeah,
so you know, it's well above my pay grade as far as in complete understanding. I mean, I'm friends with people who are conservationists for the state, and you know, I've never really posed the thought process of, but you know, in 20 years that I've been in Alabama, the last 2 years, I've actually become more aware, possibly because of falconry, but more so of seeing bald eagles in Alabama, in North Alabama. There was one time, it was around last December, ended up seeing 5 of them in a soar while I was deer hunting.
Oh wow,
Five bald eagles.
that's pretty rare actually in the South in general, right?
No, not really. And I'm in the northeastern area of Alabama, so I'm north of Birmingham, but I'm south of Huntsville, kind of on that 59 corridor, right at the base of the Appalachian Mountains, and we actually have resident bald eagles. I've had the opportunity here recently to have almost had, well, I apologize, almost had the opportunity, but I was called to actually help rescue or transport rescued bald eagles. We've had 3 of them in just the last September, October, November, 3 months. We've had 3 different bald eagles that were picked up and transported to the Southeastern Raptor Center in Auburn. So these are, you know, I can't, we have a eagle awareness program through the Guntersville State Park, through their programs that and now granted, we have migration. So there are eagles that are up north that migrate south in the fall and winter. And
Well, I know they go as far as Florida because my cousin's fiance, he's a Fish, Wildlife, and Parks official or DNR official. I'm not sure what they call them in Florida, but he was showing me pictures. He actually caught somebody that had poached a bald eagle.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Oh man.
He didn't tell me any of the specifics of the case, but
Yeah.
if I had to guess, I'm saying that guy is probably gonna be fighting for his Jello cup for a while.
It just depends. Either if he had a whole lot of money, there's the fines and things are bad enough when you're dealing with hawks and falcons, but the bald eagle, with as much effort as the government has done to try to repopulate, and falconers and rehabbers have all put in so much effort in just the bald eagles alone, that they'll pretty much throw you under a jail. It kind of goes back. See, back in I want to say in the basic window of the 60s, they were using pesticides that were causing problems for a lot of the birds across the board. It was what the, oh Lord, I can't think of the name. It's too late in the afternoon, but the pesticides that were being sprayed were causing the eggshells to be thinner. And you got to understand that an eggshell actually has to have its rigidity so that it can hold a growing being inside of it for approximately 30 plus or minus days. Well, if you've got a thinner shell, as that life starts to grow and expand, it couldn't hold that in, and therefore the replenishment of our birds season to season wasn't happening. The peregrine was the one that they first really kind of picked up on this, because they were noticing that the numbers were just majorly dwindling. And in the window of falconry itself was just kind of really getting going. And the commitment of falconers, and at the time, it was a very unknown in our country. Falconry's been around for a couple thousand years, but all of it really originated over in the European countries, in the Asias and everything. But it was really kind of a new thing here. So the people that were really only getting involved in it were very educated people. The materials to learn it, and communicating with others to gain information wasn't there. So you had people that were basically pretty well educated, biologists. They were getting into this, and they started putting their effort into trying to figure out what is going on with our raptor species. Falconers actually even kind of banded together to get the government to get involved and implement laws across the board in all the states, so that there was commonality. But they started trying to figure out what was going on with the peregrines. They figured it out. Falconers, really started investing not only just their time but their money to get a solution up. And it took until about the mid 90s, if I'm correct, to actually get peregrine off the endangered species list. So the peregrine in falconry is kind of like that. It's that. It's like the bald eagle is to our country. It's our national symbol, and the peregrine is that in a lot of ways in falconry. Well, the eagles were another one that I believe were actually very much affected by this. So the falconry really kind of helped everything across the board in getting it back, the numbers back up, and getting things done. And we see it now greatly in all aspects of our raptors.
So we kind of got off on a little bit of a tangent, but can you go over falconry in general, and some of the history and stuff like that, and really how you got involved in falconry?
Oh man, you know, everybody kind of gets into it in their own different way. My daughters, there's so many people that have actually never even heard of falconry that it's amazing. I've been given opportunity to speak to different organizations, and when they have opportunity, they see the advertisement for Travis Ulbrich is going to speak on the history of falconry at 2 o'clock here, blah blah blah. So when you get there and you show up and there's 150 people sitting in the room, you get really nervous.
Yeah.
But a lot of them, the main comment that you hear from a lot of people is, I never even knew this existed. And you kind of understand that because there's, I'm going to say roughly only about 2,000, give or take, 20 falconers in the United States actively right now. So if you're looking at 2,000 people roughly in a 320, 40 million people country, we don't even register on the scale.
So do they actually limit the amount of falconers that there can be, or how
Not at all.
does that work? Okay, so anybody can be. It's just that
Yes,
not as
anybody
many
can
people
be.
are interested in it.
It's growing very good. I have a lot of friends over in Texas that are into the falconry sport, and in Texas they've got some great programs going on over there because it is growing just in leaps and bounds with the amount of participation that's in it. My answer would be is that the first thing you got to understand is, people ask, well, how much is this going to cost me to get into? And it depends on what your circumstances are. For me, you're required to have a structure, okay, air quotes, a structure to keep your bird in. It has to be able to protect them from weather, but also have a part of that structure that the bird is allowed to be in the weather. And there's no specific design. There's just basically specific requirements, meaning
So
that
kind of like a chicken coop with an open run with a top
you,
on it, kind of
you would
thing.
you would think that, okay? So when you start getting specific on the requirements of your building, you got to have a basic enclosed area the bird would stay in, to where it can move around a little bit, it can fully spread its wings without touching any wall. Okay, so my structure is actually a 10 by 12, one of those shed outbuildings that you can buy off the side of the road. It's divided
So
in half.
so really, they don't have to have a big area for the requirement. Like
No,
I'm imagining like a garage kind of thing. You know what I mean?
right. Now, they'll generally tell you want, it would be really great if you had an area that was at least an 8 by 8. The general rule is that a red-tailed hawk has can generally have about a 6 to 8 foot wingspan. Okay, depending on the size of the bird. So you figure if you've got a bird that's got a 6 foot wingspan from tip to tip, all right, you would think, well, I'm going to have an 8 foot wide by at least 8 foot wide square structure, and that's the ideal. Some will say 10 by 10. It just depends on and every state has a little bit different on the specifics. I believe so. One may say you got to have at least this. You've got to have a weathering area to where the bird can actually get out and be in the sun, or in whatever the situation is. If it wants to be out in the rain, it can be out in the rain, but it has to be covered and all four sides, for lack of better terms, fenced in, so that it's also protected from other predators, because raptors will try to run another raptor out of its hunting area. So in the hypothetical, if my bird's out in its building and it's just sitting out there in the front yard on a bow perch with nothing to protect it, and there happens to be another red tail or red shoulder hawk or something else in the area, it 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 may take offense to my bird being there and want to run it out of that area. Well, my bird is tethered, meaning that whatever it's on, if it was just sitting out there on a perch and it was tethered so it couldn't literally fly off, it can't defend itself. So you have to have this weathering enclosure so that it can be protected from another predator.
So a great example, real quick, of um, a raptor attacking another raptor just happened to you, didn't it?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting you brought that up. We encountered and this is kind of interesting. We encountered another bird of prey in an area we were hunting, and this is an area that I hunt commonly. Um, but we were out in a wooded area, and we were there probably for 30-40 minutes, and the bird saw something she wanted to go after, and she took about an 80-yard flight away from me through the trees. She, and then I wasn't worried about her leaving me, but she ended up going after something. So here I take off after her. But in that window, I heard another bird, which I believe to be a red shoulder hawk, kind of right there in that same area where my bird flew to. However, I heard that bird go flying off, and it was just basically squawking and, what I call dog
Oh,
cussing my bird as it
okay,
left.
that's what I was actually going to ask. Is when you said you heard it, I was wondering if it made any certain sounds or
Yeah,
something like that.
re- uh, each bird, what has almost to a degree a specific call or noise, um, noise that they would make through their vocal tones, and this one sounded everything like a red shoulder hawk to me. I've got a lot of them in my area. They're actually quite common, so I know that call sound that they make, and this one was making that call sound, but it started to go getting further and further away off to my left as I was approaching where my bird was at. Well, I got over to the area. I found my bird. She was sitting up on a tree limb. Everything seemed fine, and it was about 5 minutes after that I realized what she was after. I found the squirrel that was in the tree. She was near it. So I went through my little process and what we do and how to try to get that squirrel to move. And as that squirrel kind of jumped and was started running down the tree, my bird had actually went to try to capture it. And as she flew down, she kind of went towards it, but then veered off and just went straight to the ground. And I didn't understand what was going on. It was like, and birds will have slips. We call it a slip if they miss their prey. And she's slipped a bunch. She's young, she's learning, and I didn't think anything about it. Well, she's on the ground, and I went over and, normally I can tap my glove. She'll fly up to my glove, or she'll fly back up into a tree, and she wasn't really doing anything. So I picked her up, and we stood there for a minute and, kind of letting her get her breath. And I went to kind of wrist roll to toss her back up, and she just flew back down to the ground.
Hmm.
And it, I'm like, I didn't understand this. This is the first time I've experienced it. And you don't really read about these things in the books. And I picked her up, and I'm kind of looking at her, and all of a sudden it was like I could sense that there was something wrong, and I didn't understand it. So while had her on the glove, I noticed that she had a wing that was drooping a little bit more and not up to tight to her body like her other one was. So I kind of, started to feel on her side and around her wing to see what was going on. And it was almost like it was a limp. Um, she wasn't holding any tension to it whatsoever. And I thought, oh craps, she's strained herself or whatever, something's wrong with it, but okay. So I called it a day. Um, we went ahead and went back to the car, carried her home, got her put up. And I said, I'm just going to let her rest for the rest of the day. And we did our normal process. Well, the next day, the wing's still droopy. And, I had no idea that it was, catastrophic injury. Um, ended up carried her to the vet. We got an X-ray done, and come to find out, she had a spiral break in one of her wing bones, and it just basically devastated me. And it was
Oh yeah.
basically an air dispute between, a bird that may have migrated down. It could be a bird that actually that's its normal area. I don't know. But regardless, they had their little dispute, and my bird ended up coming out of it with a broken wing. So, the long story short was my options were to go to an orthopedic vet and have a $2,000 plus surgery done, and that was not an option.
Yeah.
That definitely wasn't an option. So, you know, I got a vet that's telling me that we can't just let this. It was, and I respect the guy. He's younger. He's new into the understanding falconry and what we do. But he actually does work with a rehab facility, and their standard is that you've got to have a bird that can get back to 100%. If it can't, then you have to make adjustments and figure out what you can do and what the future of that bird is. But through the explanation of it was $2,000 surgery, let rehab, take it to rehab, which is just a completely wrong thing to do. You can't really, you don't want, it's like dumping your dog on a shelter just because it pees on your floor and you don't like it anymore. It's just wrong to do that. So I had a decision to make, and I really just started thinking about what my options were, and I ended up the very next day I got a phone call for an injured bird, and I assist in helping transport birds to different facilities so that they can get whatever care they need or have them euthanized humanely. And I got a phone call to pick up an injured bird, and I went and got it. And what the closest facility for this bird was actually a vet who works in trying to help out in these scenarios. And I took it up to her, and while I was there, I showed her the X-ray of my bird, and I said, what would you do if this was a bird that came into you? And I was kind of expecting the same answer that I got from everybody else, and it's pretty much that that's catastrophic, down.
Either put it down or you pay
Yeah.
a small fortune to fix it.
Go remortgage your house.
Yeah.
So she looked at it. She said, I'd put that bird up for 30 days and I'd re-X-ray it. And I went, I don't understand. Please explain why. Well, it was a spiral break that really didn't detach itself. It just kind of literally, it was like putting your fingers into each other. It had shortened the bone up and collapsed into itself slightly. There was no fragments that come off of it. It had just basically, it was a spiral break that collapsed into itself. And it was the larger, like in your arm, you have a radius and an ulna. The ulna being the bigger bone of your arm, and the radius is the one that kind of keeps everything in line. And this was the bigger of the bones. Well, the little bone was actually keeping everything straight. And she said, I put that bird up for 30 days and re-X-ray it. She said, but that should probably heal. And I about had a heart attack because, that wasn't an option with the other vet.
Here you were thinking that you were going to have to lose your bird, and
yeah, I called multiple people that have a lot of connections. We were trying to get this bird into a university that has raptor programs for education, and trying to turn this bird into an education bird. A falconry bird we call it man. It's been trained to accept people in various ways. In my condition, or my situation, my bird is conditioned to accept me as a hunting partner, and it doesn't fear me. We work a balance out. Well, that alone makes a bird of prey from a falconer's program a little bit more sought after, because or at least a higher ranking in the placement and education programs, because it's already it's been through that manning process. So they'll work with people a lot better than just a wild bird, and it takes quite some time to actually work them into that mode. So we tried finding, somebody couldn't. So, it was my only option was basically, this bird that I had trained and worked with and made a connection with was going to have to be put down. And now I was given another option, which was what my gut was telling me. I mean, I wasn't looking for somebody to tell me what I wanted to hear. I was actually hoping for somebody to confirm what I felt, that what I was seeing as a complete no knowledge whatsoever person in the medical side of this, to tell me that what my gut was saying was right. Just let the bird heal. So 30 days, we're looking at about 4 weeks. I'm like, that okay, that's not so bad. It's been an experience. I'm actually right outside of 5 weeks as we're having this podcast. So here in about 3 or 4 more days, it'll be a total of 5 weeks. I've been through watching my bird in pain to basic adjustments in that. Go from a bird that was like having a dog, that would sit on your lap, to having a no-mannered pit bull. I don't want to say pit bull because I love pit bulls, but it's kind of like going to going and seeing that puppy overnight turn into Cujo.
Yeah.
The bird got dangerous for
Old
a while.
Yeller.
Well, my bird got bad dangerous. She was mentally, that they go through a lot mentally as well. I had to put my bird up in a medical, I call it the medical mew, a small enclosure. It's like 2.5 feet wide by 2 feet tall by 2 feet deep. It's just enough to where the bird, and it's completely blacked out. The only time that bird would come out so that it didn't have any opportunity to hurt the wing even further was just to be fed and change the papers in the box. One time a day for 10 minutes, that bird would come out of the dark.
Man, that's got to be miserable.
After about 2 weeks of that, this bird was getting irate, and she was getting dangerous. We worked through that for about 6 or 7 days, and that was pushing the 3-week window, where she finally overnight, I don't know if she just understood that I was fixing to go ahead and put her under, or what, but she literally finally overnight just changed. It was like the next day, after my tolerance levels had reached their limits, turned back into that bird that I just loved. She wasn't trying to kill me. She wasn't trying to hurt me. And it's been good ever since. So now she's recovered. We haven't got the re-x-rays done yet, but we're going to here probably in the next week or so. But prognosis from my non-educated point of view, but seeing the bird now from where it was multiple 5 weeks ago, she's right back to where she was about 5 weeks ago, and she's great. So
that's awesome.
We'll have probably, she's not used any muscle. She's lost the majority of it, and she'll have to we'll have to basically rehab her muscles back, and it'll probably take about 3 or 4 weeks to do that through flight training. But in about, like I said, about 4 weeks, depending on how quick she comes back, and in the recovery side, there's a really great chance that we'll actually be hunting somewhere probably around the end of January.
That's awesome. So you had actually hit on something that I thought was fascinating, because I had no idea. I for sure thought that, because I had known of falconry before.
Right.
I've seen several like old English movies and stuff like that, like Robin Hood, that kind of thing. And I've seen them, with the falcons and all that kind of stuff on their hands. And all that kind of thing. So I thought that falconry were birds that were basically cultivated in personal hands. So like they were bred, by
Right.
people
Yeah.
through selection or, whatever, like we do with dogs or
Right.
anything like that. I didn't realize that you actually catch wild birds and you actually have them, you create a relationship with these wild birds and are able to hunt with them.
And that's what's the common practice here in the States. Okay. What's interesting is, and I'm I hope I get my geography right on this, but basically in Europe, they are not allowed to take wild birds and use them for falconry programs. They actually can only purchase propagated birds and have them in their programs there. The laws are a lot different, and that kind of, I feel like, if my understanding is correct, it kind of goes back to the historical part of falconry. Goes back to the origins. Falconry, or falcons and hawks, were actually, and the eagles were, they were actually symbols of status back in the ages, 1,000 years ago. An emperor could have an eagle. Then your kings could have hawks, different, of the more popular species. And then it kind of went down through. The queen could actually have something. You had your squires and different things. And it actually, as you go down the list, I wish I had it with me, because it's kind of funny when I read to people the different birds and where it leveled in your status. They actually, a priest could have a certain bird, and the priest water boy or whatever it was. I apologize to the Catholics out there, but they're, the assistant to the priest, his gopher boy, actually was even in the list of people who could have a falcon or a hawk.
Well,
And it
he has
was,
to get paid back from all of the abuse that
right.
that was coming from the priest.
I'm not going down that road, but here's the thing. See, and in Europe, it was a high crime to capture or kill a bird of prey under their laws. Okay, if you were caught killing a bird on a man's property, okay, you would end up. They would take you before the king. They would. Based on your status of income, you would have to pay like half your yearly wages to the landowner.
Holy cow!
You would have to do it. You were penalized for so many years based on certain things. But I mean, it was incredible on how the penalty for doing such, had to, and it was all basically approved or sentenced by the king himself. That's how much they regarded birds of prey in the symbols of status back through the ages. Well, they still kind of regard a lot of that in falconry over in Europe. All right, you can get into like the in the Saudi Arabia and some of those countries. Their falconry programs are completely different. They have, where we use our birds in the sport of hunting, they actually use their birds for time trial racing. Okay, especially in Saudi Arabia, they'll have their kings will have a gigantic warehouse, and you'll just see row after row after row of birds. And they train the birds and condition their birds to be the fastest flying bird. And I believe they have, they've got beauty contests for them, and which bird is more perfect in its coloration and its form. But they'll literally, they'll show up with 10 or 15 birds per king over there, or prince, and they race their birds against each other.
For some
And what
reason, we're catching some sort of a popping noise, like every time you talk. Is not sure if what
it might be because I'm out away from the internet. So
Okay.
what they do is, they have their program in how they regard falconry. Well, when because it's so new in our country, it ended up they wanted to turn it into a sport, like I said earlier. Well, in the early 1900s, we did not regard our hawks and falcons. Now, the peregrine has always had a high, symbol status in our country, but when we refer to like some of the red-shouldered hawks or the red-tailed hawks, we have Cooper's hawks that are primarily, they hunt, they'll hunt small rats, but they'll hunt other birds. And they did not have really much of a regard. In the early 1900s, they actually put bounties out on those birds because people of status who like to go out and pheasant hunt, okay, and they would have their, their little annual horseback pheasant hunt. If they would go out in the field and there wasn't a lot of birds, they would blame it on the hawks for keeping the numbers down. So they actually would put bounties out in areas over fields where they would keep their pheasant to keep their pheasant numbers up, so they could end up having a better, more productive hunt. Some of that changed, and like I said, as the information went up and people got more educated, slowly, it was really about after, and plus information about falconry in the early 1900s was almost impossible to gain. There wasn't really anybody here that was into it, and there wasn't really any information as far as books being written about it.
Well, not to mention, I mean, now we can just hit up YouTube. I mean,
oh yeah, the internet
back then. I mean,
yeah, it was much slower back in the 1900s.
oh yeah, as some would say, non-existent.
Oh yeah, it was, yeah. You only had good internet when you were in downtown, right? Somebody's gonna sit there and go, what? But anyway, I love telling that joke when I give my presentations. I say, it's really sad that information was slow go, because all the falconers and the information was overseas in Europe, and some of the stuff started to trickle back after the World War II. They were starting to bring some of the books and information, and we had more of a communication system basically by then. But I tell people, I say, but if you thought dial-up speed was slow on your internet, imagine how slow it was back in the 40s.
Oh yeah,
and it really
that
does.
would be nuts.
It does take people a few minutes to figure out. We go, wait a minute, huh? But anyway, so like I said, when we really started hitting in that window of, in the 50s, it was kind of coming on, but there was no commonality in any of the states in the 50s. Every state had their own program, if any, about falconry. And once, there was a couple of hundred, actually, I want to say around 300, maybe 400 falconers that were really kind of getting going. They were the ones that went to the government and said, hey, we need an across the board commonality in this. And they petitioned the government to actually, and come up with some laws. And it just made sense for them to go ahead and put the birds of prey under the Migratory Birds Act. And it just kind of fell under there. I guess it was just the easiest. So I guess with the representatives from the government, the falconers, they all kind of sat down and they come up with a program. And I believe the program's kind of been, it's been pretty common for, according to, through my sponsor, for quite some time, to where it sounds simple. We were talking about having a building. You got to have a building to house your bird. That's called a mew. you have a list of certain equipment that you have to have, minimum of, just to get started. Some of that equipment might be, your first set of anklets, the things that go around the bird's ankles, so you can maintain control of them. There's a strip of leather or type of maybe paracord, but we call it a jess. It goes through the little anklet and it extends out some, 8-10 inches, and then you have uh, you can hook into that and then have a leash extender that you would use that to tie under your glove so you can maintain control of your bird. You'd have to have a glove, probably a perch, a portable perch to have it on, a scale. We daily, we'll kind of get into this probably in a few minutes, but you don't just get a bird and put it in your building and throw it some food every day. You have to learn the care and maintenance of, daily care and maintenance of your bird. So, a scale is actually one of your required things that you've got to have. So you've got this list of equipment you got to have, and then they test you on knowledge. There's not one single book where you can go and read this book and say, okay, I'm ready to go take my test. The information is gained over a large list of books, and some of those books may only give you enough information to answer 3 or 4 questions on a test, but it gives you a vast amount of information in the overall understanding of falconry and care and maintenance of your birds. There is a large, actually crazy large list of birds that are out there, and it's in my opinion, it's a small list of actually suitable birds that you can use for falconry. Now, there are falcons and there are hawks. Falconry is just a generic term for hunting game with a bird of prey.
So was it originally that they used falcons exclusively, or why was it called falconry?
That's what I say. That was just the generic term that was put on it. But when you get into the breakdown between hawks and falcons, it's body style, wing shape, their hunting style. The smallest falcon that we have in this country is called an American kestrel. And if you've ever had or seen a dove sitting on a power line, an American kestrel is actually about the same size as a dove. Okay.
So what would you hunt with that?
You can hunt small birds with it, house sparrows, and it sounds crazy. An American kestrel will hunt small mice, running through the grass, but they'll also hunt other birds. Starlings and house sparrows are a very common prey for an American kestrel. House sparrows were actually introduced. They are not native to our country. They ended up somehow got introduced. I don't know how. They could have come over on a boat, or somebody decided this was going to be a great little mosquito eater. I don't know. But they are a very invasive species of bird in our country.
Really? I had no idea. So why are they invasive? What sort of damage do they do?
The problem with them, if I say this right, is that they will actually, we have a lot of our native species like the cardinals, the bluebirds, and other songbirds that we have. The house sparrow will actually move into and take over a nest of the birds that we actually do want here that are native to our country. So they'll move into a nest and they'll end up populating that area to where the native species can't do it, and we have less of the birds we want and more of the birds we don't because they take over their nest. The starling is even worse than that. This is crazy. A starling will fly into a nest of another bird and lay an egg and then leave. And the bird that is in that nest will actually incubate that egg along with its own eggs And then what's funny is the starling is actually generally going to be a little bit bigger of a bird than your the our bluebirds, blue jays, cardinals, or whatever. Well, they all hatch out together. The only problem is that starling will end up getting all the food, or actually turn around and killing the other chicks so that it can get all the food. And now we have one starling, and we've lost 2 or 3 or 4 of the birds that we want.
Wow. So I think I had heard about something like that, but I didn't realize it was the starling. That's there's a lot of jokes that could be made about that, but having to do with social policy and stuff. But
Well, but the birds can be, a kestrel is so cool, and its flight style. And this goes back to where we were talking about learning and educating on each individual bird and how it can be used in falconry. Well, the kestrel, as small as what it is, its flight style, you may end up driving down the road and you'll see one and don't even realize that you're looking at a falcon. You'll see it and probably think it's any kind of other bird other than what it is. But you'll know it to be a kestrel if you're ever out over a grassy field or a farm that's been cut, and it could have the mice running around in there. But a kestrel will end up it'll float. It'll actually hover in a spot, and it somewhere about it could be anywhere from 30, 40, 50 feet off the ground, but you'll see this big open field and you'll see this bird that looks like it's just flying like a kite, and it's just hovering there, and then all of a sudden it dips down or it goes off. It's really neat to watch a kestrel actually in the wild hunt. And then we have, the next step up, you might get into something like a merlin, and they're very similar in their hunting style, except a merlin may stay closer in towards a wood line, and they'll actually do their flying and their floating a lot higher up, and one of them will actually come and take a kestrel. So I mean, it's eat or be eaten for the most part out there. But falcons have, they're like little fighter pilots. They're really cool, in the way that they fly, and in the way that they do things, and even so much you can see it a lot in their wing shape. But when we get into the hawks, they're a bigger bodied bird. Their wings are built different and shaped different. The red-tailed hawk actually didn't fully come into its use in falconry up until I want to say the 80s, I believe, if I'm right. That they weren't even regarded as a bird to be used in falconry until around, I think they said, the 80s. And they're
is there a reason for that, or they just didn't use them?
Well, it goes back to part of it, and I believe it really comes into the fact of the historical uses of a red-tailed hawk is actually in the buzzard family, and which is pretty interesting, because we would consider something, a buzzard being something that just eats carrion off the road, and people didn't really pay attention and realize that these birds are excellent squirrel hunters. I mean, they're
They're phenomenal. I remember I was sitting. So I went to school. Well, one of the many schools that I went to was North Greenville University, and I was sitting in a speech class, and I remember watching a red-tailed hawk come and just fly across the window and drill a tree that was right there in the center of the campus, and fly off. Like it went off maybe 20 yards or whatever, landed on the ground and started eating a squirrel.
Yeah.
I mean, it was amazing. And I interrupted class and everything because I thought it was fascinating. But but yeah, I mean, they're phenomenal hunters.
They're what we normally here's our exposure to a non-falconer on a red-tailed hawk is basically seeing them like as we drive down the interstate. That's where you're commonly going to see a red-tailed hawk. Driving down the interstate, you'll see them sitting on a power line, top of a power pole, or maybe on a light post. But the interstates are the best, easiest hunting grounds for a red-tailed hawk, but it's the worst possible scenario for a red-tailed hawk based
I
on
would
their
say probably any raptor species, right?
yeah, and it's because of the way that they hunt. Okay, um, they their style is a raptor can actually their eyes, the way they're made, they can see for hundreds of yards away. They can see the smallest thing at major distance. That's part of their uh, what makes them such proficient hunters.
I
One
wish I
thing
could say the same.
right, they they can fly and soar at 100 or 200 feet above the ground, and they can ride a thermal and just be circling. We understand what a soar is, and they'll be circling around, and they'll see something, and they can actually just dive down and go and get in a tree, or dive down and take their prey, because of how well their eyesight is. Well, as we go down the interstate and you see one of those birds, they may be looking directly down below them. They could be looking across the interstate, because they're gonna stay back away, and then they're gonna take that first leap, and they're gonna dive down in almost like an upside down arch, and then they swoop down in and come at their prey basically at ground level until they crash on top of it. Well, that puts them in perfect line to become a hood ornament on a semi as it drives by, because they're up, 25, 30 feet up in the air on a line, and they take that dive and soar down in. And as they come down and into that center median of grass, they've got to cross 2 or 3 or 4 lanes of traffic, and they end up, getting hit by a car. Um, and their bones, they're pretty fragile birds. You know, they end up, it doesn't take much from a car going 70 miles an hour to break something that they can't recover from.
Hmm.
But and it goes back to the easy norm for them to and how they hunt. You get a bird that is trained by its parents to a degree, and in an area that's more wooded or out in the country. Those are the birds that have a higher percentage of survival. But the downside, depending on whose study that you read and listen to, here's the sad part about it. Some will say that 80% of the juvenile birds that were born this year won't see their first birthday. And it
Wow,
goes,
that's a huge amount.
yeah, and I don't know, I don't know how they come up with that number, because I've also read that, some will say that 80% don't make it to their third birthday. So it just depends on the study, but I can promise you this: with the amount of calls that I get to go, assist in transporting injured birds, and I'm one that because I'm in the sport, I notice every single bird that's down on the side of the road as I'm driving down the road. Um, Owls are horrific, in their numbers of the birds that get hit by vehicles, but it's generally at night. The sad part is that there's something. It's just something that they see when a vehicle's driving by, and headlights are shining. Owls will take big bugs. I mean, there are moths that'll fly at night or
Yeah.
whatever in a pretty good size, and that's an easy, quick bite for an owl. And there's just something about owls and a vehicle driving by with headlights that make them just jump right out in front of them. And unfortunately, I can tell you, probably in the last month alone, I've had the unfortunate situation to have actually stopped and found 7 owls.
Wow.
I there, I personally, I mean, this is not common in falconry. This is just me personally. I have an utmost respect for our raptors, and um, the tribal Indians that are originally on the lands of this country. They have a high regards towards the eagles and the raptors through their different things in their heritage. And the one thing that is I don't know if it's basically required, but it's part of anything when it comes to our raptors. If one is ever, if you ever find one that has been killed, or it has to be humanely put down because of injury, they either have to be buried or they have to be burnt. And it goes back into what the respect, and when it comes to my understanding, is that bird's status in the culture of the American Indians.
So
So
that's a heritage thing, I guess.
yes, yeah.
Okay.
So I tend to, if I even think that there's a chance that a bird might be injured but still alive, and I have the opportunity, I will stop and check. And if the bird is passed because of injury, if it's within my powers, I will actually, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know if it's right or wrong or legal or not, but I do it because I respect that heritage. But I will actually take and I will, if I have the opportunity, I mean, I'll bury a bird on the side of the road. I'll take a bird and if I don't have that opportunity, I'll carry it to where it can be buried, so that way that bird has been given its respect. But that's just it's my personal beliefs in the way I do things. So
Well,
if it
and your love of the Raptors anyway. I mean,
yeah,
it's a respect thing. I mean, I could definitely see that. I'm that way with any of the animals that I hunt. Now, probably not going to bury a deer that's hit on the side of the road, but it's a little bit. Well, I guess it's a lot different in a
yeah.
lot of ways.
Well,
Uh,
and that deer that's been hit on the side of the road, it doesn't have the heritage behind it. But the other side,
yeah.
if it's off the right side of the road and not in the middle, that's going to be food for something else anyway. Um,
Well, and there's got to be something said too about another predator. There's a I think, just me personally, and if you look at Native American, or I don't know exactly what they want to be called, American Indian or Native American, or whatever. I don't mean any disrespect if somebody has issues with what I just called them. Is just what I know.
yeah,
But if I I think it's it's almost like a trial, or not a trial by fire, but you find brotherhood in turmoil. So like in my book, I wrote a book. It's 10 rules for finding a good hunting partner. One of the number one rule is you must be, or the partner must be able to endure the same amount of suck. So in other words, you've got to be able to deal with the same amount of hardship as your partner. And
I love that point, dude. That's I know where you're going with that. Yeah, it's like, hey, I can tolerate being out in the rain for 3 days in the freezing cold, but if you can't, you are not a good hunting partner.
Right. But
Like that.
and maybe you're not great for this style of hunt, or business, or whatever, but maybe you're good for a stand hunt in the southeast, or something like that. Maybe you can endure the cold, but you're not the kind of person that's going to walk 10 miles, 15 miles a day,
Yeah.
you know, but I mean, you've got to feel out, you know, both sides of it. But anyway, that's off the topic. But, you know, if we know how hard it is to be a predator, and this kind of goes back to our conversation that you and I had earlier today. If you know how hard it is to be a predator and to be in touch with cultivating your own food and, you know, having to kill your own food and stuff like that, you develop sort of a brothership. And like, I was in the military. I'm a former combat vet. You know, the people that I was with in those dire situations, they'll be my brothers and sisters forever because of the hardships that we had to endure. You know, no matter what, we had each other's back. We fought, all that kind of stuff. We had problems with each other. Same thing with, you know, when you take it to predator species, yeah, okay, you're killing my dog or whatever, but there's this level of respect that I have for you because you've had to go out there and you've had to grind your ass off and go out and get your own food too. Maybe,
Right.
and you know, I'm hypothesizing, but maybe that's where that level of respect came from. And that was kind of a long, drawn out explanation of where I was going with it. But
Well, I'll give you, kind of a similar, and this kind of gives you an understanding. I chose, in falconry, we here in the States, we were kind of touching this earlier. We are allowed, under our permits, to go out and acquire a wild raptor. Okay. Not really going to go into how we do it. That's the joy of falconry is that,
yeah, I definitely wouldn't want you to, because I don't want somebody to go out there and catch a bird and all that kind of stuff. So.
And the you know, we kind of keep some things secret because if we told you everything up front, then it would just would, you know, you wouldn't have any surprises. So, but here's the thing: on average, a falconer turns around and gets to a point where it's okay. We have a known window of how long it'll take from the day we acquire our bird until the time it's ready to go out and fly and hunt with that bird. Okay. And it's about a 3 to 4 week window. So some go out a little bit early and, you know, some wait until, you know, shortly before the leaves fall off the trees. Well, I've had 2 personal birds. My first bird last year was acquired off of an interstate, near a busy intersection near a high school. I'd watched that bird for weeks and weeks. I watched this bird for almost 3 months, and I knew that was the bird that I wanted. I had pictures of it. I had it patterned. I knew I could tell you what light pole it would be on at what time of the day. That's how much I watched this bird. I fell in love with this bird and never even had touched it yet. But that's the bird that I wanted and no other bird would do. And it's kind of abnormal in falconry because for the majority of them, they say, okay, it's time to go get a bird. And, you know, there are falconers that have they've clocked themselves in trying to find and acquire a bird and putting hundreds, if not almost 1,000 miles on a vehicle.
Holy cow.
Over the course.
Is there any specific reason for that? Are they that hard to find, or?
Well, depending on where you're at, sometimes they're just that hard to find. Now you might find one and it just doesn't, you know, it doesn't work out that you can acquire that bird. So you go on down the road and look for another one. And then there's some that, you know, every third light pole, and here I'll give you an example. On a red-tailed hawk, you might see one, you know, here, and you won't see another one for 20 miles. There's a bird that is commonly used in falconry. It's called a Harris hawk, okay? They're commonly found close to the border between the U.S. and Mexico in the warmer, drier climates. And they are excellent birds to hunt with. they will actually hunt in a cast or multiple birds together. A red-tailed hawk, red shoulders, they're all single loners that, they don't want to be around another bird.
So the Harris Hawks actually hunt as a team?
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
wow, that's cool.
they are communal, for most part, communal birds. My very close friend that lives, 30, 40 minutes north of me, he has two Harris Hawks. He bought them. They were propagated. They were, chamber raised, and um, he bought two of them, and they're brothers, and he hunts them together. And let me tell you what, you talk about two bad boys, man. Um, they they hunt, simultaneously. One will go into a tree where a squirrel's at and go to chase it, and the other one will fly right past that tree and turn around and wait for that or that squirrel to jump out of that tree into another one, and then he'll go after it. They're amazing birds.
So
But
do they seem to have do they learn some sort of, um, I guess, each other's shortfalls and stuff like that? Or do they
I
have a strategy, does it seem like, that they learn?
no, I have not. I have not been in the opportunity to be around them as much to actually say what or why. It's just something that, it's their style. It's in their DNA. It's what they do.
That's cool.
It's kind
That's pretty neat.
yeah. But anyway, so, you know, I found my bird. I wanted her, and it took the day we went to acquire this bird, and my sponsor's with me and his friends with me. We went out there, and it was like, okay, it's Saturday morning. I just got off work. The guy showed up. We're headed out there to where this bird's going to be. I'm telling you, I know she's going to be on this light pole. And we get down there, and she's nowhere to be found. And I'm like, I work as a fireman, so I'm on a 24-hour shift. The morning I came into work, the bird was sitting on the light pole where she was supposed to be. Got it?
Wow.
The next morning I get off work and the bird's not there. And I'm like, what crap? So we rode around a little bit. We couldn't find her. So we said, we'll come back in a little bit. We went and looked some other places for other birds, because they were just like, hey, let's just go. We'll go look around, check the area. We come back 30, 40 minutes later, still not there. And as we're going up the ramp, I happen to notice over in the grass, there's a bird on the ground, and I went, holy crap, there she is. So we run down, we zip around, we come back to that exit, we get back up on that ramp, and as we're slowly going up that ramp, we see her, and she's got a squirrel, and her mama is sitting up on a light pole. In that window, the bird was still being taught by its mom on what it can hunt and how to eat it and different things that they do. Well, the mama had brought a squirrel in so that the bird could practice killing it, learn how to make into it to eat and everything else.
So do they, real quick before you get too far into it? So do they? Well, two questions. So how old would that have made your bird? And two, is that a normal practice where they bring them in like alive, for those younger birds, those juvenile birds, to kill them?
Okay. The window of that would have probably put my bird at the window of about 5 months old.
Oh wow! So she was really young when
Yes.
you first saw her.
Yes, and a side note, in falconry, we're only allowed to take out of the wild. We're only allowed to take juvenile birds. The majority of our raptors actually mate for life. Okay, so a red-tailed hawk is going to find a mate somewhere between that second and third year, and they mate for life. They're a pair, and you can tell a juvenile from an adult, or what we would call a haggard, based on its tail color. Nature is awesome in its design. A juvenile will actually have a longer tail feather and longer outer wing feathers. It helps them to learn to fly, kind of like training wheels, okay? So a red-tailed hawk, if you see one on a light post but its tail's not red, doesn't mean it's not a red-tailed hawk. It's just most likely, if it's a red tail, going to be a juvenile. Now, a red shoulder hawk, which is a completely different bird, but the juveniles look very similar because they're brown. They have brown tails, and that's another, part of their juvenile wonderment is the fact that nature makes them pretty much all brown. A lot of these birds are going to have that brown color, and not all of them, but I mean, just in our hawks, they're actually going to have brown tails, brown wing feathers, and everything else in that juvenile state, so that they're more camouflaged when they're sitting up in a tree. Okay, but
So is that making? Well, I guess that would serve as a couple different purposes, and um, to hide from prey easier, and also to hide from other birds that would want to
yeah,
get them.
yeah,
I guess.
I would agree with that, and it's juveniles, they're in that learning stage, to become a proficient hunter, they're in that first year, they have the setbacks. So this is kind of some of the training wheels thing. But now here you were asking, does the parent bird bring the food in, alive or dead? Well, I had the pleasure to observe one day. I was in downtown, and I seen a juvenile bird kind of sitting on the corner of a building, and had a bunch of mockingbirds driving it crazy, and so it flew off and it went up in this tree. And this was when I was first getting into it. I was in love with every bird I saw. Always kept a camera with me. Was taking some pictures. Well, all of a sudden I hear this red tail, screech coming in. I'm like, holy crap! Here comes the mom, and in her, in hand, is a squirrel. Well, she lands in the same tree, but opposite on the tree than where the juvenile was at. She comes in, she lands, and she holds over off to this side for a few minutes. And she is literally, in my personal opinion, making sure that the squirrel that she's got has been dispatched. Okay, so it doesn't hurt the juvenile. Well, that was one thing that I observed and kind of theorized. But the second thing was,
Dispatch. When you say dispatch, you mean dead or just not able to move all that
oh,
much?
no, dead. I mean,
Okay.
because here's the thing: a squirrel can do a lot of damage to
Oh
a
yeah,
hawk.
I've been bit by them. I told you
Yeah,
my my aunt and cousin now own Twiggy the water skiing squirrel. So I've been around squirrels and I've been bit by them. And yeah,
so have I. So you understand, well, they can do just as much damage to the feet or to the legs of a hawk. Well, she's over here on this branch to the right, and the juvenile's up here on the left, and he's just squawking at mom, having a time. Well, after a few minutes, she finally moves over close to the branch where the juvenile's at. And I'm sitting there watching them, and man, that juvenile is just dog cussing mama. And it kind of gets closer to mom, and it reaches over to try to get that squirrel. And she kind of holds back and, kind of says, no, you ain't going to get it. She was literally teaching this bird how to, how to take that food from her.
wow.
It was just another lesson. Well, I sat there and watched, and this kind of went on for a minute or two, but she was also teaching that bird speed and how to grasp quickly at what it wanted. So he would kind of reach over, and she'd pull back, and he'd reach over again. Well, finally, after about 3 or 4 attempts, that bird turned around, and as fast as you can blink, that bird went whap and grabbed a hold of that. Now they're playing tug of war with this squirrel until that bird finally ended up. Mama finally let it go, but she didn't give it up without a fight, and she was doing nothing but teaching that bird, you know, everything that it needed to understand. It was one of the coolest experiences to sit and watch that it was just amazing.
That would be really neat.
So, here now we're back up on the ramp. We see the bird over there with the squirrel, and God love it. My sponsor says, well, you might as well give that one up. That bird ain't gonna be caught for the next couple of days. And when they get that big of a meal, they're gonna eat until they're gonna eat until they're full in their crop, and then they may end up taking what's left of it and going flying up to a tree branch, cashing it up on a tree branch, and coming back and eating more later. But you're talking a squirrel can end up being somewhere between 250 and 350 grams. Okay, goes back to that measuring thing. Um, depending on how hungry the squirrel is and how much they can actually want to stuff into their crop, I would say on an average, 150, maybe 200 grams is a good size meal. So if you got a large squirrel, there's going to be some leftover there. So that bird will turn around and take that thing up to a branch, and it may sit on it for the rest of the day and digest through the crop some of that, and then finish it off later that evening.
So real quick,
Yeah.
because you keep using this term crop, what exactly is the crop like in the anatomy? Is that like a stomach?
Oh God, this is where I'll probably say something that the other falconers who are listening to me, if you haven't already rolled their eyes, when the bird takes the food in, it goes into the crop, and that's where it all kind of breaks down. That's where they store it and hold it, and then it gets digested and goes through the system.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
And I've I've processed several birds, right? And
yeah,
I've noticed that there's like this stomach up close to the neck that, well, I guess I don't know if you would call it is that the crop? Like
yeah,
that
yeah.
section up
That's
neck, up close to the
yeah,
neck?
yeah. Right below the neck, right there at the kind of the upper part of the chest. That's where the bird puts their food over at, and holds that. Chickens will do, they'll eat all day long, and then before they go to roost, they'll get up on the roost and they'll digest that, the process that food in the crop overnight, and it's that's just what birds do. They hold up their food in that crop. So, um, yeah, that wasn't many of my questions on the test, thank God, because when you get into all the anatomy and everything else in that process, I'm more worried about what their daily burn rate is as opposed to how they do it. So forgive me. I can't get all in depth and understand and teach and explaining the process of how they run their food. But yeah, they'll take it in. They take that food in, and it fills up in the crop, and then it goes through the digestive process. So, but depending on the bird and its rate of metabolism, 150, 200 grams on a wild bird. Now, I don't do 150 grams a day on feeding my bird. There's a different process to it, and I can explain why. But um, you've got a bird that's out in the wild that's flying a lot and having to stay cool or stay warm or whatever. Well, that amount of food gets processed at a different speed.
You're gonna
The
burn
amount
a
of
lot more energy.
Yes, exactly. So a bird that is in a falconer's hands may actually only we measure their weight. So in the hypothetical in my program, I wake up, and I go out to the building and I weigh my bird every day around 8, 9 o'clock. Okay. And I record that weight at 8 o'clock. And um, if we're gonna, say we're gonna hunt, we go out and we hunt. We harvest a squirrel or not or whatever. When I come back, um, that bird will get fed, and depending on what I'm going to do. Let's say I'm going to hunt the next day. I know how much weight in food that bird needs to have in 24 hours to maintain the weight where she was at before we hunted today. So
Hmm.
in the hypothetical, if my bird weighs 1,200 grams, okay, some people measure in ounces, I measure in grams. If right now my bird hunts at 1,200 grams, um, but she burns on a warm day, she burns 40 grams per day in rest mode. Not, we're not hunting, we're not doing anything, but she has a normal daily burn rate of 40 grams. Then I have to feed her somewhere around 40 grams to maintain the 1,200 that her weight is, to keep her where she's at. If I feed her 80 grams, then she's gonna be 40 higher roughly than where she's at today at the 1,200. So weighing a bird is a daily routine, and in a lot of circumstances we actually weigh them twice, but we basically develop a 24-hour burn rate, or how many grams per hour that bird will burn. So if um, you know there's you know there are groups of people out there that don't like what we do. They have the impression that what we do is we starve our birds so that they'll do what we want them to do, and it's
That sounds
actually
completely opposite of what
right.
they're saying then.
We have I will say that we have response weights, okay? If and I kind of give the analogy of this. If you're really hungry right now and you pull into the grocery store parking lot and you have a list of things that you need to go grocery shopping for, I promise you, you're going to come out with about $20-$30 more than what you
Yeah,
went in to get, because you're
that's
hungry.
yeah.
Okay. That is the grocery store's response to you being hungry. They profit. Okay. But you're not by any means starving to death or unhealthy. You're just hungry, right?
Hmm.
So there's a healthy window of where my bird's response weight is. Okay. And if I don't give her anything for the rest of the day, and because I bumped my head and I had to go to the hospital and I didn't get to feed my bird may miss a meal for that day, but that bird's not going to be hurting in any way. Now, that's the best way that I can explain um, the management of weight in falconry.
Well, I
But
would assume that in nature, they're not always going to get a meal every single day.
no, they are not, because what if that bird's sitting in a tree and it just so happens that a hurricane is running through town today? All
Yeah.
right. I mean, I'm not talking about being on the coast, but it's finally run itself up land, and it just happens to run right through my county. And it's going to rain and wind and crap for the next 2 days. That bird's sitting up on a tree limb, and it's soaking wet, and it could fly if it had to, but it ain't going to fly very good, and it ain't going to fly far. But it's also not going to go out and hunt. So it's going to sit on a tree limb, and it's going to try to stay warm, whatever, for the next 2 days, and it ain't going to have a meal. All right. That bird, you would hope that bird got at least a good crop right before the storm blew through. Otherwise, it's going to be real hungry in 3 days. But
Hmm.
all right, so here's response weight. We we went out to the field today and we hunted, and we took a small game, a squirrel or rabbit or whatever. My bird has an opportunity to actually take, and I don't just rip as soon as it takes and gets something, I don't just take it and throw it in the bag and pick up my bird and say, okay, we're going home. The bird actually gets to eat some of what it harvested, but it's not, I balance that. I give it so much, but then the rest of that is food for later, in case we're at home and that hurricane runs through. That bird's still got to eat for a couple of days. So what my bird harvests is, it goes in the freezer and it's fed back to that bird at a later time. Some people actually, some people like to take their harvest and cook it and eat it for themselves, but they are also maintaining some of that food for their bird. So one of the other things, I gave you a percentage of these juvenile birds that actually will never see their first birthday. Falconers, because of our low numbers in regards to the millions, and I'm talking of birds, not of people, but there's a lot more birds out there than there are falconers that will actually step in. So some people say we really don't make much of a difference, but I look at it like this. I have a bird in my possession right now, and that bird will make it to its first birthday. It may actually stay with me until its second birthday, because in falconry we're limited on the amount of birds we can have, but not how long we can have them. Ethically, we take a bird in, we hunt with it as the juvenile, and then a lot of people actually at the end of the first year, at least by the end of the second year, we'll go ahead and release their bird as a very proficient hunter that has been put in. It's been put in situations to have the highest possible rate of taking game in the most safe of environments.
And why do you say ethically?
Because the okay, ask me the oh boy, I just had a brain fart on that. Go ahead and ask me that again. Why?
So, so you had said that, ethically you release them, at the end of the first year or the second year or whatever.
Right.
Why do you say ethically?
Okay, there. In my opinion, I know of falconers that have actually had. I know of one falconer that has had a bird for 20 years. Okay, but in the ethical side, is it right or wrong for that person to have had that bird for 20 years? No, that person has a very good relationship with that bird, and that it's they are proficient hunters, but they have their that is that person's program as well as the relationship with that bird. In my opinion, on the basics of the ethical is the bird somewhere between its second, third year is going to go out and find a mate. Doesn't mean that they, if I release it after 5 years that it's not going to, because I promise you they will. But I have had that bird when I look at ethics in a bird, I'm taking a juvenile bird and I took it out of the wild, and in the wild it has many variables that can cause that injury or death. I've put it in a protective state, do the best that I can by that bird in its training and putting it in over game to have the best possible chance of taking something and honing its skills in the safest environment that I can put it in. And we work together and we do, I get pleasure from it, and the bird gets safe scenarios and training. Now, at some point, that bird needs to go back into the wild naturally to propagate other birds. So if I took this bird and I got it to its second birthday and I released it and it went out and it was proficient and it continued to thrive, and then that bird found a mate, and on average, they're going to lay 1 or 2 eggs. They actually had birds up at Cornell University this year that hatched out and proficient and successfully fledged 3 juvenile birds this year. It was awesome to see. And, I would think that that's a little bit more uncommon, and it goes back to food source. If there's a heavy food source and the parent birds can keep the food coming in for 2 or 3 juveniles, then they'll have that opportunity to go ahead and grow to the point where they can leave the nest. Generally, you got 2 parent birds and a lower opportunity for them to take food. Bringing back, a small rat doesn't go as far as what a good-sized squirrel is going to bring, or a rabbit. So they have a very good food source up there at that, in that area, and they did good. But anyway, on the average, if I get a bird to its second birthday and by its third birthday, it's now got 2 juveniles, and those 2 juveniles leave the nest and they're proficient in doing what they're doing. If one of them makes it to adulthood, now I've not just saved 1 bird, but I've also got that second bird, possibly 2 more birds out into the wild. But every year that my bird that is in my possession right now fledges a bird out of the nest is a success to the bigger program. So if I save 1 bird, it has the potential to save 10, 12, maybe 15 more, and hopes that, those offspring, some of those will make it to their second or third birthday and they put out more. And that's just kind of the basic math and in what I hope that'll happen. Mm-hmm. The numbers may be smaller, they may be bigger, but
so are you at a, sorry to interrupt, but are you at a at a position where you think they're still a threatened, like they're still in a threatened situation, or do you think they've really recovered to a point? Because you had mentioned earlier that, pesticides and, I'm sure there's other factors as well, have played a factor in the reproduction and stuff like that of these different raptor species. Do you think that that they've pretty well recovered um, and are, in a situation where they absolutely, you have to get them out there to breed?
Well,
Because you mentioned there are only like 2,000.
falconers.
Yeah, 2,000 falconers. I mean, that seems like if you
Right.
say 1,000,000 birds, I mean, that's not even close to a drop in the bucket.
And I know that's why I said, the amount of falconers playing the role into the amount of birds that are out there that could use or not use assistance. We don't even register on the scale for what impact we have in what falconry plays in the impact of the overall program. Okay. But here's where it does matter, in my personal opinion. 40, 50 years ago, there were a couple of hundred falconers. And those couple of hundred falconers ended up making a major impact in the future of falconry because they figured out what was actually causing the problem in the reduction of numbers in just the peregrines. Would that have been figured out or not? We don't know, but it's the way that it happened. A few hundred people, along with biologists and other resources, got their heads together and they found the reason why the birds weren't propagating. All right. And as the time goes by, we're looking at 2,000 roughly. I mean, and the number can't be that off. Let's what if I'm wrong and we have 4,000 falconers? Okay, we still don't
Yeah, you're
register
still nothing. I mean,
right. But if there's 2,000 of us out there and 1,000 of us bring in another falconer, and those falconers then start to expand out. If falconry actually, because we're in such a young state in the overall picture, if what we're doing with our education and what we're learning about these birds and how they hunt and how to do it right and what doesn't work and what does, what's to say 50 years from now we don't have 25,000 falconers out there? Well, if 25, and we don't all take just a red-tailed hawk, okay? But let's, in the hypothetical, if we went from 2,000 to 25,000 in 50 years, 50 years from now, there's going to be an impact. Okay, there'll be that opportunity to do better. But the balance between how many birds are killed this year versus how many that we save, unfortunately, the scales are tipped in a very bad direction. But it's still growing. The falconers are kind of working and learning how to work with rehabbers, and I've personally, there's two different point of views between rehabbers and falconers, and there's been some rough stages, but there's a lot of those bridges. And I'm not going to go deep into it, but I'll just say that there's two different point of views in the care and maintenance of birds, and it goes out of passion for them. But I hope to be a guy who actually works with rehabbers to let them get a bird built back up and healthy that's a young juvenile bird, but it's been taken out of the program for multiple weeks or months, and then be able to take that bird and put it into a falconry program and continue to maintain that bird, but yet put it in a safe environment to learn how to hunt more proficiently than what it's been given up to that point anyway.
one has got to be in a lot safer hands, in the hands of a falconer, than out in the wild.
Yeah. So You know, there's good people, there's bad people, and everything, and everybody has opinions about them. But you know, because we have a lot of birds, um, and because we have a lot of birds, even though they're protected, there are some things that, you know, they look at and say, this is nature and it's part of its selection. You know, if the birds are going to continue to dive off of a power pole and fly across an interstate and get turned into hood ornaments, well, if they're that dumb, we're just natural selection is going to take the stupid ones out, and the ones that are smart enough to go hunt in the woods, they'll thrive and survive. So let's get rid of the stupid ones. Man has stepped into, you know, our conveniences have stepped into their world. And if we can, you know, now that we've become the bigger being in the overall picture, there's some aspects of where we have to turn around and say, yeah, but we need to still take care of these over here. That kind of goes back to the pesticides versus, you know, the knocking the numbers down. Um, you know, all you can do is hope that 50 years from now, um, that people have learned from, you know, things that I've done, and you know, I hope to pass it to my kids. That's the one beautiful thing about this. My kids were the reason I got into it, and they're just as involved with it as me. And I hope that even if they don't pursue it, 50 years from now, when they're driving down the road and they've got their kids in the car, that they see every time they go past a light pole, or I mean a power line, they know the difference between a red-shouldered hawk and a red tail. And every time they see one, they're going to think about times they were with their dad, and what that means. That's a memory provoking, you know, image that will always go back to them, and give them, you know, a good memory.
And that is, you are absolutely echoing, um, you know, what I think about what I'm doing in the outdoor industry. You know, I want my kids to think the same thing, because that's what I thought. My grandpa, he was, you know, he was pretty prominent in the outdoors in Montana, and he was the president of the North American Guides Association and stuff like that. And, you know, so he was, I don't want to say really well known compared to how it is now, but, you know, he was a pretty prominent guy. And I had the opportunity to grow up next to him and be able to, you know, see the outdoors the way he saw it. And I want my kids to be able to enjoy that same thing, just like you were saying with falconry, just the outdoors in general. You know, there's something special about being able to get out there and enjoy, um, you know, the mountains, or just anywhere out in the woods, out in the prairie, wherever you want to be. But there's something, and we've talked about this a couple different times, but I think there's a connection, and you've said it, but I think there's a connection between us and nature. And whether it's a chemical connection, electrical connection, whatever, you know, just a feeling, spiritual, whatever it is, we just feel better knowing that we're connected, and knowing that we're out there. And I think it's a really healthy connection. And I want my kids to be able to experience that, just like what you're saying with your kids in falconry.
Yeah. Oh, um, I have just a feeling. It's a thought, a theory, but I have nothing that can prove this. But I honestly, things are. I truly believe that nature is passed through DNA. And it doesn't matter whether you're a red-tailed hawk, you're a mouse, you're a dog, or you're human. Nature, in in its most truest form, gets passed through from thing to thing to thing. Um, I a bird doesn't have a manual on how to hunt for something. It to a degree mimics what it sees the parent do, but the parent doesn't teach that bird how to grasp at its prey, to gain control of it, to not get hurt, and to to dispatch its prey rapidly. So that
Well, let's put it in a way that people may be more able to understand. Right? You buy a lab, it's got a huge retrieval drive.
mm-hmm.
Like if you throw a ball for the lab, most likely any lab I've seen, it wants to go get that ball, or it wants to go towards the water, or whatever. Those are innate. They've got to be DNA traits that are bred into that dog. And the same thing with other animals. I mean, you could see it across the board with several different animals.
Yes.
I mean, but there are certain traits that are in the memory of this animal's DNA.
Right. So if that be the case, if this gets passed and through, that there is just there's a base connection of everything across the board, and there's some that can read it and hear it or know it. I mean, there's some people that are out there that they can read the wind, they can feel things. It's you can't teach. Well, I mean, to a degree, I guess you can, but what I'm saying is, all this connection is there, and I have my way of reading it, hearing it, feeling it, and I make my connections. I told you I chose my birds, and I had an opportunity. My bird actually had a sister. I watched and observed them both, but there was something about my bird that I have in my possession that just there was something about that bird that just reached out and said, "That's the bird that I want." I don't know what it is, but man, I knew this bird before I ever laid hands on her.
So do you only have one bird? I mean, not that one isn't enough, because it seems like there's a whole lot that goes into it, but do you only have one?
Based on at my licensing level, okay, as an apprentice, I can actually by the regulations, I can only have one bird,
Oh,
and
okay.
I respect that. Now, about the middle of this next year coming up, 2020, I will my permitting will upgrade into a general practicing falconer, and then I actually, under that level license, I can have up to 3 different birds, and they can be the variety opens up. I can actually have any combination of red-tailed hawks, Harris hawks, Cooper's hawks, kestrels. I think it even opens up. There are some people that actually do falconry with owls.
Wow.
Practice is widely used, but I'll say this: up until about the 80s, nobody really even cared to use red-tailed hawks, and they're in the southeast, with the prey that we have available, they're one of the most proficient used birds that we have down here. And yet, up to 10 years ago, people actually people actually didn't have high regards for what we call squirrel hawkers. Squirrel hawkers were actually looked down on. We were just chasing junky tree rats, and if you were anybody, you had a peregrine or a merlin or something like that. So
Well, it's the same thing with just squirrel hunters in general. I mean,
yeah.
a lot of people don't, they see them as a tree rat,
Yeah.
but they are delicious. I love eating squirrel, and I really, it's kind of cliche, but I think they really do taste like chicken.
Let me tell you what, it all depends on how you cook it. But at the end of the day, I have yet to do it. But Mama Kay from Duck Dynasty swears up and down. Phil swears that what you call squirrel dumplings are the way to go. So
Yeah.
take it for what it's worth. But I'll tell you, I've thrown many of them on a barbecue grill, very well seasoned up, and enjoyed them. And I've smoked a stew out of some and enjoyed them. But you know, they're tree rats. That's all they are.
Yeah, they're delicious, but a lot of people look down on it, and they're like, they don't see a difference between that and a rat. And I'm gonna be honest, in survival situations and stuff like that, I've eaten mice. I haven't eaten rats. And there's a similar taste. I'm not gonna lie, there really is a similar taste, but again, kind of tastes like chicken. I mean, you know, it's a little bit tougher. Obviously a mouse is not really that tough, but a squirrel is tougher than chicken.
Yeah.
But they're good. They're really good. So I could absolutely see why people would hunt them.
Well, it's what kind of goes back to the movie The Matrix. Did they just not know what to? Did they just not know what to call or to differentiate the taste? So everything just tastes like chicken.
Right. Yeah. Well, and
I
people
remember how the line went.
people call BS because you say, oh, it tastes like chicken, but I mean it really does. I mean, I don't know what else to say about that other than, yeah, it really does taste like chicken. But I don't know, it's really good. And a lot of people turn their nose up at it. But then again too, you look at the different things that people have eaten throughout history, and we're going to turn our nose up at that. There are a lot more crazy things that people have eaten that you could turn your nose up at rather than eating a squirrel.
Yeah. Oh God. Friend of mine, we got into. I got a neighbor down the road that is a very avid hunter, and he ended up. Oh God, this has probably been 6-8 years ago. He ended up going on a bear hunt somewhere northeast. Don't know what state it was that he went to, but he got permit and hunting license, everything. He wanted to go get a bear, and he harvested a very good sized black bear, and brought all the meat home. Well, he went and barbecued a good batch of that up, and we were talking one day, and then he was telling me about it. And I said, man, I'd like to taste that if you got any extra. Ended up rode down there, and oh my God, it was so good. I don't know.
Oh yeah, a bear is awesome.
Great. Yeah. It broke into a conversation on just a really weird topic of people talking about, well, what's the weirdest thing that you've had to eat. And they were talking, some guys were talking about eating bobcat and this and that, blah blah, and one of them ended up talking about eating coyote.
I'm gonna try it. And same thing, I'm supposed to be going on a wolf hunt, and I'm sure I'm going to have some anti or whatever that's out there listening to this podcast to try and catch me up on something. But I'm going on a wolf hunt. I think it's next month. But anyway, I'm going to eat the wolf. Just because I take that back. I've heard of one person eating a wolf, and that was, an old trapper. And apparently that was his preferred meal, was wolf. But yeah, coyote and wolf is something that I'm going to eat just to be able to say, hey, I've done it. And that way somebody can't say, well, you're killing these animals and not eating them. If I have
Yeah,
to turn it into sausage, I'll eat it.
right. And I fully respect that because I've got an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, I guess 17-year-old stepson, and I introduced to my stepson back, when he was about 8 years old, the art of BB guns. Both my girls have, they've got their own BB guns, and um, I teach them young about the gun safety, how to handle, and I mean just everything about it. And my stepson, God bless his heart, he got real good about what he was doing. But one of my, the first day, first rule, I said, I'm going to teach you how to do this because you need to learn it. You need to be proficient. You need to understand the safety. I said, but you also need to understand that if anything that you uh, shoot and kill, you better be prepared to eat it. That was the way it was taught to me. It's one of those, you can shoot all the targets you want. You shoot the side of the barn till the barn falls down for all I care. But when you turn that thing onto a bird or the neighbor's cat or whatever, you better be prepared when you pull the trigger to eat what it is that you shoot.
Yeah.
And never, I don't believe I've ever had one time where I had to worry about it or question it. But, my girls go hunting with me, fairly regular. Obviously, they go out with me when we do the squirrel hunting with the bird. Um, every season, hunting season in Alabama kicks off with dove hunt. That's the big, weekend event in September here. And, for the last, oh God, 3 or 4 years, we go dove hunting, and they're the best little retrievers that I could have ever asked for. But we have a ball when we go. I mean, it's not just about going and shooting birds. I mean, we have a ball. Um, in the way that I do it. And we pack food up, and the cooler full of drinks. They get all the snacks that they want, and they get all dressed up in camouflage. They carry their BB guns, because they feel like they're going hunting. Now they don't really get to shoot at anything, but once they start getting bored, that's when they go to take off and start shooting anything that they want to shoot at with the BB guns. But we make it a celebratory event, but it's introducing them to um, the overall of where the food comes from, how to respect it, gun safety, just so many aspects of it. But I don't have to worry about my girls looking at anything and going, "Aw, but that's Bambi."
Right.
Mine look at it and go, are you wrapping that up in bacon with some cream cheese, Dad? I can't wait to put that on the smoker. My girls ain't scared. Um, and that's just kind of how it works out for us. But um, I'm trying to cultivate that connection with nature in every conceivable aspect that I can, so that they can actually learn to hear that inner voice in them that is connected with nature. Because once they hear it, I believe that um, it puts them in a whole different level in their existence than just McDonald's, video games, and what can we do next? So,
Right. Well, I think that's a great place to end it, man. Um, I really appreciate you talking to me about falconry and stuff like that. And, um, you know, I'd love to have you on again, for some other conversations and stuff like that. You're great to talk to and seem to really be pretty cohesive. So, um, so yeah, man, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
it's an absolute pleasure. Falconry in itself is a very old sport, but it's a very honored sport in so many different aspects. Um, I, the people that are in falconry will understand this. Maybe some of those that aren't don't. So please understand this when I say um, I have a very awesome sponsor who, um, has been to my programs that I share falconry and what little bit of knowledge that I have with it, in hopes to educate people in what's out there that's hurting, killing the birds, as well as, every aspect in the great ways of what falconry is and what it can be. So he's very open-minded to me having these kind of conversations. And as an apprentice, you have to be very careful out there with what you say. So to fellow falconers that are out there, I hope that I've honored and respected the the overall of the sport in our conversation. I hope that I haven't given any misinformation, and anybody that replies back to you, please make sure you forward to me anything that, if I got something wrong somewhere, or needed to be a little bit more specific, please, feel free to pass it through Aaron to me. I'd be appreciative of it.
Oh, absolutely. And so
Um,
real quick, how can somebody find a sponsor?
Man, we could talk for a whole nother podcast on just becoming a falconer. Every state has generally got a club and association. They're really somewhat, kind of easier to find on Facebook. But if you want to get into falconry, you probably would get with your state conservation people. There's generally somebody that is over the special permits in every state, and that person is generally the one that should be over falconry. But if you'll just get in contact with your conservation office, they can direct you in the right place. Then they'll pass along some information and hopefully some contact numbers on any clubs or any information to kind of get you in that direction. Becoming a falconer sounds hard, and it, to a degree, it is. To even take the test and get into it, you got to find somebody that's a sponsor. So what prospective apprentices have to do is literally, you find these people and you offer to go out and beat the brush with them. Go out and spend some time out in the woods, running around, chasing a bird and hunting with an actual falconer. You have to learn, is this what's right for me? Am I right for the birds? And is this a commitment that I want to take on to the sport as well as to a bird, and will it fit in my life? You, to a degree, I hate to say it this way, but you're auditioning for a sponsor. You're showing what you are and your commitment to it, and your overall person in regards to whether you'll fit for it. And one sponsor may not take you, or one falconer might not take you as an apprentice, where another one will. But get yourself out in the woods and beat the brush, and show your commitment to get somebody to take you serious. Once you get into that group, into those people, you'll learn what information it's going to take to educate yourself and move up through to where you can get to the point of taking the test and actually getting that permit to get your first bird. It won't happen in a week. It's a very intensive study, and it's very much well worth it. It's very well worth it. So if I can help out in any way, you can find me. Let's see, and I, if you got show notes or whatever, but you can catch me at Yappy Beeman at Gmail, YAPPYBEEMAN at Gmail. Just email me and I will do everything I can to help you get into it, and we'll kind of go from there. But I'll do what I can.
I'll definitely put it in the show notes, and I really, really appreciate it, man. Thank you very much.
It's been an honor to actually get to talk with you people, and I look forward to any opportunities that I can in the future. I love roundtabling when it comes to hunting with you, so we'll pick it up somewhere else, and hopefully people haven't gotten too bored with hearing my voice.
Oh, absolutely, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Y'all be good.
All right.
See ya.
All right, bye.